Hello everyone, this is Domino here. I'm going to be starting something a little new that I thought up not long ago, and I thought, since now it's October, maybe it would be appropriate to do this. I'm starting a little thing called Domino Tales. It'll be a little bit of it's kind of like in a podcast format, but not really. It's where I'll be talking about experiences that have actually happened to me in my life. Um, these experiences will be things of unusual or possibly paranormal in nature, um, or even experiences that I've heard of or have happened to people that I know personally. But most of them will be some that I've experienced myself. And I still hold in my memory, my long memory. I've always had a pretty good memory, so most of these details will be pretty fresh still for me. Um, Hopefully you will like this. If not, that's alright. You are completely open to interpretation to what you believe in life, but I do believe that life holds many mysteries, and so many of them are not explained. And I believe many of them just never will be. That's just the nature of life. You're not really meant to know everything. And sometimes certain things come into our life that we just don't understand. And it will make us feel vulnerable. It will make us feel curious. Sometimes we're afraid. Sometimes we like it. Sometimes we don't. This first episode I'm going to call 1511. Now, the reason I call it this is because 1511 is the house number to a home that I lived in for quite some time. Mostly in my youth, preteen into early teen years. I'd want to say maybe 7 to 8 or 9 years in my life. I'm not going to say exactly where this house is. I'm not even going to give the full address, because I really don't want people approaching it. It's just for safety reasons. Not that they will get hurt, but I really don't know who exactly lives there now, and it's for the privacy of whoever possibly lives there now. Um, Originally, my father owned the house. Now, I don't talk about my father very much. I don't have a very good relationship with him. I prefer to distance myself from him. He's poison. And I'm not going to go into that details because you really don't need that drama. Today I'm talking about some experiences in this house. 1511 has a long history. It was built in between 1930 through 1931, and it is unusually a Cape Cod design home, which you don't typically find inland. You mostly find those along the coastline, coastal towns, hence their name, for Cape Cod. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. It was possibly a specific design that maybe the architect honestly wanted for that area. And it's honestly the only home in the entire town that's in Cape Cod style. And trust me, I've done my research. 1511 has a long history about itself. Many owners have lived there. Many of the owners have died there. Right before my family had moved in, I remember there had been an old man who lived there, and he had recently died, hence why the house kind of went up for sale. And it was fairly inexpensive, too. Especially for a house of its age and history, it would probably be expensive, you would think. But when we got it for a pretty decent price, and it looked fairly small on the outside, but inside it was quite spacious. I mean, it was pretty nice. Um, had an original fireplace to it, although that had been altered over time. It didn't have the original, I want to say the original placement of the fireplace inside. They replaced that with a tiny tube, and it was no longer really usable. And honestly, we had problems with that later on. Bats and stuff would get up in there, and I remember one time a bat actually came into the house while me and my mum were at home. I was home from school, I was ill, and we had to try to catch the damn thing, which it took all day, and we didn't get it till the end of the night. It went into the basement. She killed it with a broom. Well, I think she did, or maybe somebody else did, but anyway. The old man who lived there, he wasn't very social. Um, I remember the neighbors said they rarely saw him. He was kind of a recluse, honestly, and he wasn't a very nice man, apparently. I had heard that he had been a minister or something, or I'm not really too sure. I don't know how true that is, but what I do know about him, that he always kept himself. He was very much a shut-in. That really wouldn't be a bad thing, honestly. But he just did not like being around people, apparently, and I can understand that. I can relate to it myself. But the neighbors used to hear things coming from the house that they really didn't quite know what it was. This old man would be up through all hours of the night, and in his basement. The basement of the house is quite spacious. Um, I never really liked being down there. I don't like the feeling of it. When you go down into this basement, you just get this feeling that you really don't want to be in there. And I know that kind of sounds a little stereotypical, basements are creepy kind of vibe, but this one really was creepy. You go down there and you really just felt like you weren't safe. And it had a lot of structural issues too. It would flood all the time during rainstorms. I don't think the land placement was very good. The floor was all torn up, which I'm actually going to get to soon, of the reason why. The old man, there were two small rooms that were in the back of the basement. Like, there was the main basement when you come right down the stairs, and off to the one side there were two tiny rooms, each with their own closed door and a small bathroom. I remember I always tried to keep my cats out of that bathroom because the ceiling wasn't finished and they'd try to climb up in there, and we always worried that we wouldn't get them out of there, so we kept that door closed. And I never really liked being in that basement anyway. There were too many spiders and crap like that, and I hate those. But in these back rooms, there were several severe fissures in the floor, like several cracks. And they just weren't natural looking. Like, they didn't pose too much of a problem, and they looked like they had been resealed. But the most unusual part about it is that the neighbors used to hear, when the old man was down in the basement, they used to hear him banging things, or like he was possibly tearing up the floor. And one of the neighbors actually approached him one day and said, I've been hearing sounds throughout the night. It kind of wakes me up and stuff. I was just wondering if everything was all right and stuff. And he never gave him a definite answer. He said, I was just doing some repairs or something like that. I was all right, just kind of write that off. But I think it was really unusual how my neighbor at the time told me how the sounds that were coming from there didn't seem like sounds you would be making for repairs, especially into the floor of all places. And considering that the basement was already kind of structurally unsound, digging holes through the basement floor and then resealing them up is just really not a very good idea, honestly. Unless he was trying to make it more structurally sound, I'm not really too sure, but just the way that they were placed in the middle of the little rooms, like it wasn't near the edges or anything like that, in the middle. And it's almost like he was burying something or looking for something. Maybe he heard of something that, like, maybe the house was built over top of something and he was trying to find it. Nobody knows. Um, the man eventually did die in the house. I don't know where he died. But nobody ever really figured out why he was making such a racket in the middle of the night. Quite unusual. Um, it could just be, people being a little too nosy into his business, but I just thought that was kind of unusual, honestly. When I lived in the house, mostly me and my mom would experience things, but many times at night we would often hear things. Um, Things that we know that the stuff that we owned were not making the sounds. Uh, and it wasn't just like little typical bumps. We'd hear scratching noises. Like, maybe not on the walls, but just scraping noises, and we never really knew where they'd come from. It's kind of a weird grating sound, and it'd be kind of slow sometimes, like somebody purposely was dragging their nails or something, and it was really unnerving sometimes. I'd hear that a lot. We would hear voices in the distance, like hushed kind of tones. You could never tell what they were saying. It kind of just sounded like people in the distance having a conversation, but you could never hear exactly what they were saying. And it wouldn't always be very clear. I used to hate sleeping in the upstairs. The upstairs was a furnished attic, because the house was technically supposed to be just a one bedroom on the first floor, but the attic was so spacious that you could have 3 more bedrooms up there. I didn't like it up there. It's where I'd hear a lot of the sounds, mostly. The basement, I didn't like it either. I remember upstairs there was this long hallway straight to the back, and back there'd be a small, tiny bathroom, just barely enough for you to breathe in. It made you feel quite claustrophobic, honestly. And me being a night owl, and the experiences of this house were not very positive for me. This home holds a lot of upsetting memories. And it's not just, the experiences of, hearing things or possible paranormal entities haunting the house, which I do believe, yes, I do believe it is haunted. We'd have electrical appliances turn themselves on. Our microwave would turn on randomly. I remember one time my mum actually got up in the middle of the night and turned off the microwave because it would come on. She always worried about a fire starting. Me being up in the middle of the night, I'd have to use that bathroom upstairs. I didn't feel like going all the way downstairs to use the one on the first floor. I didn't like being in the house when it was dark. And I'm not afraid of the dark, honestly. I've always been very relaxed in the dark. Being in this house, it just had a very overwhelming feeling. You couldn't breathe in it. And it may have had something to do with my bad childhood experiences from my abusive father. He was a very terrible man. But the other experiences in the house really heightened the situation. Um, I have this clock in my collection. I am a clock collector. And I inherited it from my great grandmother. It's an old Art Deco mantel clock built in the 40s, or made in the 40s, I should say. She bought it in San Francisco, um, and it's been broken for many years. It is still broken to this day. It has not run for many years, and I intend to get it repaired, but it's an antique and it's quite expensive to do that. So I've just been keeping it in my collection, keeping it clean. It's also electrical. Now, keep that in mind. This is an electrical clock. We used to keep it in this cabinet, and it would be in the dining room, just in this cabinet. One day when I was home from school, which I was often, I didn't like going to school. It's not that I didn't like learning. I love learning. I just didn't like going to school. I didn't like the people. Me and my mum were there, and she was laying down, and I was laying on the couch. The house was dead silent, especially for during the day. Very silent. We heard a clock chiming. Now, we didn't have any clocks in the house that chimed at the time. My clock collection itself was very small. I didn't have any that chimed, and they were all upstairs in my bedroom. And I was on the couch feeling ill. And a very distant chime, like just a few, 2 or 3 chimes. And it was this clock. This clock who was not plugged in, chiming. Now, only me and my mum had heard this, and it sounded very weak. It's not a clock that you wind up, so it had no gears that were previously wound up to allow it to do this. You have to plug it in for it to run. And I remember specifically on its repair tag when my great grandmother tried to get it repaired once, and the clockmaker he couldn't fix it. It said, the clock runs fine when it's plugged in, but it just does not chime. Well, if the clock doesn't chime, then why was it doing it now? It's quite interesting, I think. That happened twice, and then never again. I have never gotten that clock to chime ever, plugged in. I have opened it up, looked through its entire motor. The hammer doesn't even come down all the way to the spring, so it cannot chime even if I try to force it, and I don't want to force it because I'll break it. I have a little bit of knowledge about clocks, although I am not a clock repairman. I just know from what I've studied. There's absolutely no way that that hammer could come down completely on its own and chime, especially when not plugged in. It's one of the little experiences I remember. I remember the doors upstairs in the upper bedrooms. They would unhinge themselves and slightly drift open. Not very much, just drift ajar. You could never keep them completely shut. And that could just be, because the house was built in the 30s, early 30s. It's very old, but I don't know. I remember every time I'd go to sleep, and I still do it to this day. When I'm in a room by myself, I shut the door because I just feel more at ease that way. I'd always shut that door, and it would feel shut to me, but it would still unhinge itself when I wasn't looking, as though something was trying to open it or come in. This last experience that I want to talk about for 1511 is one that I remember most, other than the other family problems that used to happen there. This experience happened to 3 people, including myself, me, my Aunt Kathy, and my sister Colette. And this is an experience that actually, in my memory, and helped me to inspire to write one of my books, Pava Nocturnus. It was Halloween night, I remember, and we had just got done trick-or-treating, and we were at home. My mum was going out to get some snacks and stuff. We were going to watch some movies until we go to bed. My Aunt Kathy was going to stay over and visit. And she was fairly young at the time, too. Like, I think, was just getting out of high school. And the way the house is designed, there's a huge bay window in the front in the living room. And then if you look through that window, you look straight back through the house, and there's another big window in the kitchen. There's like the living room, then there's the dining room, and then the kitchen finally, and it looks straight out through the back, out into the backyard. And there used to be a small forest in the backyard, in between there, and then up on the upper hill, there was apparently an apartment complex far up on the hill, but that's beyond the forest. You could walk to it, but it's kind of a little bit of a walk, and it's not really very comfortable because you have to walk up through the hill and walk through the brush of the tiny forest and such. The backyard would steadily incline with a little hill as it, would gradually go up farther. Little, almost like little steps in the ground. And this was beyond the garage. Me and my aunt were sitting in the living room sofa, which was facing toward the kitchen up through the house, and I remember it was fairly dark outside. You couldn't really see much of anything, and the light was very faintly illuminating the backyard, and on the backyard I saw this figure, what seemed to be kind of standing up on one of those little ledges of the hill. Just standing there, and I thought, maybe it was a tree or something, but after looking at it for a long time, I could tell that's a person or something. Standing in the dark, looking down at the house. Now, it didn't look... if this was a person, it didn't look right. It just... It didn't have a complete shape of a person, kind of. It kind of looked like a cloaked person, like whoever was standing there was wearing a hood or a cloak or something. Now, being mine, this is Halloween night. I'm sure a lot of people were wearing costumes and stuff, but this was after trick-or-treating hours. It was getting close to being fairly late, and only a few of the grocery stores in the town were still open. That's why my mom was going out to get us some snacks. And I told my aunt, what is that up in the backyard? And at first she couldn't see. And then my sister, she's like, yeah, there's something out there. We all pointed toward it. And I remember very specifically my Aunt Kathy looking rather nervous. She was usually fairly calm, but I remember she looked really nervous, and she said to just stay in the living room and don't stare at it. Let's wait for your mom to come home. She'll be home soon. And we couldn't really close the curtains to the back because they were lace curtains. On the kitchen window, they were laced. So you could still see through them fairly good. And this figure stood there all night. Just standing up there. And the next day when it was daylight, it was gone. To this day, I do not know what it was or who it was, and it never happened again. And it's something a little bit odd that kind of just sticks with me to this very day. Kind of wondering what it was. I wasn't afraid of it, but thinking back on it, it's really kind of creepy. Something was standing up there, and I never really did figure out what it was. I remember over the course of the next few days, we found many dead animals in our yard. I remember my little sister, Katie, at the time, she was really little, and she came in the house crying. I don't think she remembers this. She probably wouldn't, but she said she found a bird in the yard, and it had holes in it. It had holes in the side of its body, like it was punctured by something, and it had been bleeding. It was really quite unsightly. It was a blue jay, I remember. And my sister had found that, and somebody went out and cleaned it up, and we also found a few squirrels over the next few days. It was quite unnerving. Actually, we kept finding dead animals in our yard, and yes, we had pets, but they were indoor pets, and whenever we let them out, we never let out the cats. We had a few dogs in our time, but whenever we let them out, we were always with them, so it's not like they were killing the animals or anything. Maybe something else nearby was killing them. We don't really know. I just thought that it was kind of interesting that, I see this figure up on the hill, and then the next few days we find dead animals in the yard for about 3 days. It's quite unusual. But, yeah, there's something about this house. It's fairly haunted, and at least I believe it is. Um, Whatever spirits are there are probably very restless. Uh, Psychologically, if there are spirits haunting the house, they probably did not like my father. Every time when he would have one of his outbursts over something very ridiculous because he's a fucking idiot, um, I remember that night is when I would always hear something in the house. It would always be whenever he did something. And that's when me and my mum, or even my sisters, they said they would hear things too, experience things. It'd also be little things like we'd come back home and something in the kitchen would be in a different spot from where we last left it. Just little things. Salt and pepper shakers, silverware. They'd always be in different places. But yeah, that's a few little stories about 1511. This little house that's in a small town in a valley surrounded by a forest. Don't really know who lives there now, but if somebody else does live there now, I think it would be interesting to actually ask them, have you ever experienced anything in this house before? And I'd love to know what they'd have to say. But I guess that concludes the first episode to Domino Tales. I will come back again with possibly another tale about an experience that I've experienced or somebody else that I know. I plan to have my boyfriend Miah come on with me too, so that we can share stories that both him and I have experienced not only together or even individually. And I just thought that this would be something a little interesting to start doing in the month of October, when experiences of the such and the sort that aren't fully explained are said to be at their highest. Although, paranormal can happen any time of the year, not just October. But I conclude this episode, and I will see you next time. Bye.